Thanks to Unknown Resistor, K-Flan the Plan, and Miss Spudnut for helping with the funding for this video. If you'd like to get your own shoutouts or special perks on the side, consider supporting the channel via Patreon. These perks are also available through coffee and channel memberships. Thank you, and enjoy. We all may have a variety of things that interest us throughout our lives, and sometimes as kids we might think outside the box and try to merge these different interests and imagine how they might play out. Maybe you're someone who has a knack for the action and thrills of sports like basketball, and you like to cheer on your favorite players. He's done it! Or maybe you're someone who likes to sit back and watch nostalgic cartoons like the Looney Tunes, and get a good laugh at the timing and jokes that have aged wonderfully. But this particular pairing, despite how much it might make some people scratch their heads, still caught on to a point where it garnered not one, but 2 movies. All with an international league of fans staying excited even with the 25-year gap between them. Yeah, I'm talking about Space Jam. The first movie's been held dear to many for almost 30 years now, and man, who would have thought that such a weirdly specific concept from a few commercials of all things would keep this much hype going for this long? Well, I guess that's what we're here to find out. And like many others, I too saw the first movie plenty of times growing up. But on the other hand, I skipped out on the second for the longest time, assuming it would have never held up. But hey, maybe I can find something in it now that this much time has gone by and now that I'm a little older. But before going into any of that, we've got the usual history portion to unfold. And maybe I'll do one for the second movie too, but for now, let's naturally start with our focus on the first one and see how it all came about. Around the start of the 90s, Nike had a rather unusual idea for Super Bowl commercials for one of their big shoe brands, the Air Jordans. They brought in Michael Jordan, of course, as well as Bugs Bunny? Well, he's also a beloved icon of different generations, so why not? But even with this confusing decision of putting the two together, the ads that came from them seemed to fly pretty high back then. So given the success, they made another unusual decision, approaching Warner Brothers and asking them to get a movie made with this premise. Of course, there was hesitation at first, but after some more convincing about the relevance between Bugs and Michael together, they went along with it too. And at first they thought they could keep this relevance going smoothly during production, that is, until Michael announced his stepping away from basketball in 1993. But then he made his return a few years later in 1995, and the whole project was picked back up just like that. And it all led up to the movie getting its big theatrical release in 1996. So yeah, it's been about 30 years since the release of the first movie, and it looks like even after all this time, this unusually specific premise managed to keep quite an invested fan base afloat on a lot of scattered parts of the internet even to this day. While I for one never really got to see the crowds and the buzz that came from this movie when it was brand new, I'm sure we at least know about the sides that came from this premise back then. Some may have been genuinely curious about said premise itself and wanted to see the Looney Tunes and or Michael Jordan, or maybe some more were hooked in with some of the stuff revolving around it, be it the merchandise or the legendary website for the movie's hype, which looks like it's still up but actively dead. Meanwhile, some others on the outside look like they were siding with the late Looney legend Chuck Jones, who had quite a few things to say about the movie for himself at the time. But as for me, as a kid I found it on a VHS tape in a store one day. Yeah, remember when those were a thing? And eventually I was just playing and playing this tape to the point of mercilessly draining it. So yeah, I guess I might have gotten something from it back then myself. And looking at more recently, I gotta say it's been certainly one of the more bizarre watches for sure. Certainly not bad, but sometimes it can be pretty hard to follow in different ways, and I'll get to those in a moment. So overall, this is a kind of movie that was presented in that fairly underrated animated / live action hybrid gimmick, which as we've seen growing up can lead to presentations ranging on quite the different scales, whether it's Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or maybe that reanimated movie. Yeah. But I'd have to say I find this one to be placed a little securely in the middle. It has its moments for sure, as well as a few questionable decisions. Though I have to say, the first couple scenes came off fairly clever, as it looks like they were trying to play out the real life events for Michael as accurately as they could.
Anyone lend me a pair of sneakers?
I'm not taking my sneakers off. I am Sneakers O'Toole.
All while still trying to add a few of their own liberties to have it fit in with their own narrative. And that goes into the animated side of this movie, where things can certainly get more over the top and wacky. Or actually, more like Looney. Yeah, I'd say Looney. So for starters, their first big obstacle is they'd have to find a new voice actor for Bugs Bunny and some of the other characters, as the former voice actor, Mel Blanc, had unfortunately passed away a few years before this movie's production even began. Well, Interestingly, a few of the characters here were played by Greg Burson, who took part in the original commercials that started all this. But as for Bugs himself, they brought in the starting voice titan Billy West, the man who played so much of our childhood classics. And hey, he does a fairly decent job for a start here. There's also the big debut of Lola Bunny, make of her what you will, and voiced by Keith Suchi. Now Lola herself I'd say is fine. Nothing too special. Yeah, she's cute and shows she can fend for herself plenty of times, but otherwise she mostly just comes off as a basic strong love interest for a main character. Although, while I've never seen it myself, I hear she had a lot more going on in the 2011 Looney Tunes show, so maybe I'll check it out for myself at some point to see what she's like. Now, a few more spots I'd like to highlight in the cartoon cast are that they took an extra step in the classic side by bringing back the legendary June Foray to reprise some of her roles. And I didn't know until more recently that they had Maurice LaMarche as Pepe Le Pew.
Oh, a little surprise for you, my friends.
You've been playing in the toilet again, haven't you?
And one of the bigger spots, they had Danny DeVito playing the villain Swackhammer.
Looney?
They were all great at providing more of that energy and charm into a lot of these characters for presentation, even if the writing for them can be pretty awkward and kinda cringe at times. And going back to the live action scenes for a sec, there were a handful of big stars here too. Everyone knows that Michael Jordan's here, of course, and he's got Stan alongside him, played by Wayne Knight.
Hello, Jerry.
Hello, Newman.
Who I'm sure we all know of by now. There's also side appearances with some pretty big names like Larry Bird and even Bill Murray. There's also some small appearances like with Dan Castellaneta.
Will you just let me watch the game? Barkley's killing us.
Ooh, that's bad.
And to build up the sports side, they featured NBA players that allow a lot of this story to even happen, like Larry Johnson, Sean Bradley, Charles Barkley, and so on. As for the story they have, I feel that while they are what sets up half the layout here, there are still plenty of those scenes that make the story feel kinda flatter and a little unbalanced to a point where it might be easy to forget that the Looney Tunes are playing a big part here. Though it's not all bad, like it's kinda sweet to use the scenes they use to establish Michael's perspective here through his personal life and signs of his own goals. And of course there are those important scenes with the other NBA guys getting their talent drained out, allowing the aliens to become the Monstars. Now that's the kind of stuff that helps keep the flow moving. But then they have those scenes where the plot just goes to a halt to show what's going on with the NBA players after they were drained, which is pretty uneventful, I gotta say. Well, except for like, one or two jokes. But aside from that, they use these extra minutes just to stretch out the point that we already know. The players are lacking their talent and they're worried about it. Like, yeah, I understand this is just to help bring the story to a calmer point for a little so it's not crazy antics the whole time. But still, a little more variety would have helped make those slower scenes a bit more interesting. You know, just so it wouldn't be the same thing going on with them throughout. I don't know. I feel like they didn't really need the point to go on for this long, especially when they could have used that time for some other story elements that would have benefited from the extra attention, particularly like with the implied story arc with Bill Murray. In his scenes, he admits his interest in joining the NBA, and he makes a big comeback around the end to help keep the team afloat for a bit more. Then he leaves and later regrets his decision. Yeah, sure, that on its own can be a complete story arc depending on how you see it, and while I too feel it's got some decent substance to it, it also feels kinda rushed. Almost like they tried to pack in too much with too little space. They could have given him his own boost in the story by showing him through some kind of training routine in between everything going on to get ready for the big teamwork scene. And heck, they wouldn't even need to reveal that's the outcome they're going for. They could just disguise it as simple workout sessions, and you could still make that big reveal at the end that this is what they were secretly building up to with him. That could have helped give Bill a bit more substance on his side, as well as provide a slightly more balanced variety to the story. Or if that doesn't work and they needed to keep the NBA screen time in, they could have also given them some visual variety, like maybe show them taking up some hobbies or something. You know, stuff to freshen up the scenes a little and maybe add a bit more to their in-universe personalities. But you know, aside from that, the rest of the layout had some fairly stable pacing otherwise. There was a lot of build-up and preparation for the tournament that would basically put the Looney Tunes' lives at stake, and there was a healthy timeline for the tournament itself to show enough of a balance of gags and risks at play here. And while this movie might have its issues, I can still feel quite a handful of good in this too. The soundtrack was great, even if some pieces haven't really aged the best. The characters are mostly likable, there's plenty of appealing action going through in the animation, which the animation itself was pretty great at the time. And hey, I'd say there are a few smaller details that still hold up fairly well after all these years. And as weird as the movie may have been with this very unusual but unique concept, it still managed to win over a lot of fans despite being a ploy for marketing. But you know, even with that in mind, it still provided enough of its own thing to help it stand out and give a fairly entertaining one-off movie for a lot of those fans to enjoy for years.
Objection!
Oh, yeah. So for many years, it seemed like this movie was gonna stay as just a one-shot. That is, until 2014 when word got out about a sequel in the works, which would end up being Space Jam: A New Legacy.
Yeah, he's not a real lawyer.
Although one obstacle they faced for the longest time was trying to find a celebrity player. Michael Jordan didn't really see a good reason for this happening, so it's pretty clear he wasn't coming back for this. And from there, it looked like the next best choice they were able to get was LeBron James. I mean, yeah, he might have a bit of charm to him, though honestly, I wouldn't exactly say his acting was as good as Michael's. In fact, sometimes his acting may not seem that good in general.
No! Bruh.
But it's fair to say he's still had a few amusing and slightly investing moments here and there. But anyway, after another long waiting period from the announcement, the movie finally got its release, both via Max and theaters in July 2021. Now, this on its own would have made the movie's release a little dicey, as this was still during a fairly active state for the whole you-know-what at the time. But hey, a lot of people still watched it one way or another, and well, it looks like this had a lot more mixed reactions than the first movie. And I kinda had my own mixed feelings on this too. So just like before with Michael in the first movie, they kinda made an attempt to tie LeBron's life into this narrative too. Although it looks like they took a lot more creative liberties this time. I mean, unless he really did have a secret fascination with the Game Boy that we don't know about or something. But okay, I can get why the gaming element was thrown in. It's again a bit more of a parallel between the childhood LeBron had through his story and the childhood Dom's going through in this whole modern era. This also ties into the plot pushed along by the villain, Al G. Rhythm, who wants to extort Dom's game plan to boost the potential in his power and spotlight through the serververse. And yeah, based on Al's presentation and the reality of particular different releases Warner had over the years, I might see an amusing connection there too. Almost like the Warner company's not afraid to laugh at some of the past choices they've made. I don't know how accurate that take is, but it can be easy to see it that way, and it comes off a little funnier as a result. And Al himself had a pretty appealing villain presentation too. He can be very cunning, manipulative, energetic on a nicely entertaining level, and he has plenty of his own goofy moments too. And a lot of that was thanks to his actor, Don Cheadle. So on the side, the movie goes through a mash of family matters as LeBron tries to save Dom and redeem himself after his strict parenting. And we get to see a handful of celebrity cameos, as well as expected gags from Bugs, Lola, and the gang, a handful of different visual styles from the stunning 2D to an unusual CG presentation. There's the big basketball game they build up to, of course, although this one feels a bit more rushed through compared to the first movie, and they're going up against
The Goon Squad!
The what?
This goon squad.
And for a lot of the movie, before and after the big tournament, there were a lot of different media references on different levels. Sometimes it can be amusingly self-aware at how absurd and too far Warner Brothers have been going and might even continue to go with some of their properties, but even still, with their acknowledgement regardless, there are still a handful of details thrown in anyway that might make you cringe. Some maybe even bigger than details in the first movie, whether or not they were even intending it. And as weird as it sounds, I think one big reason why this movie wasn't so well liked was the amount of dated trends, topics, and countless references that were thrown in here.
I did it, Morty! I killed the versions of us that were in Space Jam!
Now, the first movie had some of those as well, but not quite as commonly as what was shown this time around. A few of those examples were also tied in together with a few jokes as well. But make no mistake, even if they were intended to be cringe for the characters, that still won't guarantee a laugh from the viewers most of the time. At least the material in the first movie had a 25-year gap from the second movie. That helped some of the material from the first movie air out so it wouldn't feel as jarring to those who might have felt like looking back on it at the time. And the nostalgia from that might even help as a slight plus in that regard to those who were around during its release and might even want to think back on what was probably a simpler time in their lives. Whereas with this movie in 2021, I say give it a couple years and see if any of this starts to feel a bit more smooth on delivery. And with the first movie as a whole, there were just more limits in place, which okay, it might feel a little more restricted for some viewers, but in a way this also helped the writers strengthen their creativity within the boundaries they were given. Whether it's Michael's life pieces that were sewn into the narrative, or the big conflict the Looney Tunes had to save themselves from. And these boundaries led to a more focused story and more material to be given for each presented character to keep track of, all while providing enough creative space for visual gags and story details to unfold. And yes, this also provided enough legroom to provide some references too. But okay, I think it's fair to say there were some references that had a bit of planning in this movie too. Like when they were outsourcing with other WB titles in the scenes where Bugs and LeBron were trying to reunite the other Looney Tunes. Some of those fit pretty well and had a surprisingly smooth transition between the main elements here. But then you also have those moments that were just tossed in because memes.
I'm hunting wabbits.
Oh my god, you guys, look, he did the thing!
You did the thing! Mwah!
And a whole bunch of characters and shots from other Warner properties were tossed in for smaller references too. Like there's Austin Powers, Casablanca, a load of Hanna-Barbera going in, and wait, the Iron Giant, what?
Where's the giant, Mansley? Where's the giant?
But then again, for a place called the Warner Brothers Serververse, I guess that's to be expected. And hey, maybe you'd like seeing all these different characters and their titles represented. Like I said before, it certainly wasn't the first time this was attempted. We've had a handful of other movies trying out this kind of theme in the past, and a few of them ended up becoming quite the fan favorites. So I will say overall this movie was a little better than I expected. After reading through a handful of reviews and posts on this, I was mostly assuming I was gonna have a bad time going through it. But then I was surprisingly surprised by a few of the jokes and directions the story went. Now, does that mean I'd recommend this movie to others? Well, not right away. Despite the nice details this movie had, it's not really something I'd go back to multiple times. Maybe it is just my nostalgia leaking out of me, but I feel a good amount of details here were still handled better in the first movie. Whether it's the story's pacing, pieces of the delivery with the comedy, or the balance of the animated and live-action visuals. So, while I agree this movie wasn't as good as the first one, I still feel like there was an alright presentation on some aspects here. You might enjoy it if you're looking forward to seeing a movie with ridiculous material going up to insane levels, sometimes even higher than the first movie too, for better and maybe debatably for worse. In that way, there's a chance you might have some fun with this. Maybe not the best, but it didn't feel like a complete waste either. Yeah, pretty surprising, isn't it? For what can come off as such a weirdly specific concept and with hardly any activity going on between the gaps, it's kind of impressive how this can still stand as a huge fan favorite for many. But I think it's fair to say that mostly applies to the first movie, while the second one is still pretty iffy. But it doesn't look like the future of Looney Tunes is dead yet. We're finally getting Coyote vs. Acme later in the year, and I have my hopes it'll be worth the wait and the struggles. But even aside from that, it doesn't really look like the Warner team has a whole lot more going on outside of a few movies centered around Bugs Bunny and Speedy Gonzales. And even still, there's nothing really known about them either. What they're about, when's the release, it's mostly up in the air for now. And yeah, they might not even be sport themed like the Space Jam movies were, but I'm sure the modern fellas at the studio have some entertaining ideas for them. And you know, maybe further down the road, Warner might eventually make a third Space Jam movie for its 50th anniversary or something. And maybe they'll broaden their horizons to make more movies for the Looney Tunes characters and give them some zany adventures and stuff. Who knows how they could turn out or if they'll ever happen. Sure, we certainly don't know a lot of what the studio has in mind with these beloved cartoon icons we've all grown up with. But like I always say at the end of these videos, we'll soon see, won't we? For now, that's all, folks!